Guaido tried to take over his embassy, his envoy tried to take over the embassy. The embassy protectors were a group of North American activists. They were given the keys by the legitimate Venezuelan government. They were given the passwords to all the computers. They were gotten permission to go into the embassy, and then they held the embassy for 37 days until the U.S. Secret Service kicked them out, and now they're fighting for their freedom. And I think my time is over, and I wished I could speak more about this.
You have another minute.
Oh, okay. So we do.
You're so generous.
Carol is our treasurer and our timekeeper, so I really appreciate that. The trial starts in 2 days, on the 11th, and for the embassy protectors, and they are not allowed to tell the jury that Nicolas Maduro is the legitimate president of Venezuela. Because in the U.S. courts, Juan Guaido is the legitimate president of Venezuela, even though not for a nanosecond has he exercised his presidency there. They cannot tell the jury that they were in the embassy with the permission of the Venezuelan government. They cannot tell the jury that they had legal advice, that they were there legally. They cannot tell the jury that the Vienna Convention is on their side and that is part of the U.S. law. They cannot tell the jury that there was a mob outside the embassy that was preventing them from getting food. They cannot tell the jury that the embassy was illegally, while they were occupying it, the electricity and water had been turned off. In short, they can't exercise their First Amendment rights. And we stand in solidarity with them. I would like to, because they're going on trial in 2 days, I would like to have us all make a photograph of us standing in solidarity with us. And is that?
Yeah, we have that sign in the background.
Yeah, would people be willing to stand up and just show everybody who would want to stand up and join us here in the front, and Bill will take the photograph?
Absolutely.
Good, so please come up. Bill, do you want to organize that?
Yeah, if we can, maybe if everyone, we're probably gonna have to, about Hong Kong, because many people think that a movement that's supported by Marco Rubio, Mike Pompeo, Nancy Pelosi, both houses of the United States, both political parties, the movement that's supported by them is a pro-democracy movement. So people may be confused on that point, but there is some literature there, as well as literature from the Task Force on the Americas. I also want to say that the money the funds, the cash you contribute will go to the Institute, but if you would like to contribute to this fund here, write a check and make it out to the Task Force on the Americas?
Yes.
Yeah, so.
Give it to Carol.
Oh, just give it to Carol. Do we want to take a book collection? I mean, don't they still need legal funds for the embassy?
No, all the money, all the cash will go to the Institute. We need it desperately. So, and.
I'm talking about I'm talking about the embassy protection.
Right, we've done a fundraiser for them in the past.
Okay.
This is not the time for that. We need to support this, the Institute. But if people want to write checks to either of these organizations, I suggest you make it out to Task Force of the Americas and say something on that.
If you make a check out to the Task Force on the Americas, it's tax deductible, but mainly it will go to the embassy protectors.
Okay, so there's that. One final word before we switch over to Q&A. Next week we have another excellent program by our very own Lou Finzel, who, as many of you know, is a anarchist, humanist, Marxist, I guess, utopian. But anyway, he will be here next week to talk about Rabelais, and revolution. And it may seem strange, and this poster may seem strange, but he always makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
And I find a lot of information from him.
Brilliant.
So with that, I will turn it over to another comrade here, Alan.
Okay, we're going to do a Q&A session, and the way I think we're going to do this is we'll just go around the hall, and if you have something to say, you can raise your hand. As we get to your turn, I'll call on you. Everybody, because there's a lot of people here, will be limited to 2 minutes to ask your question or make your statement, and we want to urge everybody to please keep your comments to a minimum, try and focus on asking questions, and so that we'll have time for the group here to answer them. So
We do need to be out, finished by 12:30.
okay, we have to be out by 12:30.
Not be out,
Yeah,
finished.
yeah, Bonnie, do you want to go ahead? Just go ahead.
No question, just to remind everybody, Roger, you pay Roger for the books.
Carol.
Okay, on Venezuela.
Me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to start, and actually I need somebody to, but I'm going to go around, okay, in order. So I'm going to start over on this side of the room since it's closest. So we'll start in the back, and if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. Anything over here? Question? I can't see. So. Any questions or comments? Going around? No?
Just about somebody.
They're going in the back.
I just wanted to make a quick announcement here, if I could. Nesbitt and I are here today. We're helping organize a conference in New York in the end of March on U.S.-Cuba normalization. It's going to be kicked off on Friday night with a reception at the Cuban mission. I know all of us can't make it out to New York, but I do urge people to take a card and go online to the website and please have your organizations endorse the event in New York. You'll see a list of organizations that have already endorsed the event, but I urge each individual organizations to endorse this event. Of course, we're calling for the end of the blockade, end of the travel ban, and so forth. So please take one of these cards with you, and you can also sign up as an individual endorser on the website as well. That's all I have to say.
Where are the cards? I have one.
Yeah. I'll have a whole stack. I'll pass it around.
Add any questions?
I just wanted to add that, just as Alicia said on the panel, there's a lot of things going on in Latin America, and there's a very clear reason why the United States pinpoints Cuba. Because Cuba is the limelight. Cuba is the encourager of sovereignty and self-determination throughout the Americas. And the United States knows it. The United States is trying to destroy Cuba. The blockade and the sanctions kill, and that's what they're trying to do. I also passed out some cards dealing with Oscar Lopez Rivera, who's not only going to be at La Pena, but on the 23rd of February, he's going to be at the Cultural Center in San Francisco. And you shouldn't miss him. Either listen to him at La Pena or catch him at the Cultural Center in San Francisco. It's very, very important. Puerto Rico is incredibly important in reference to this neo-colonial, neoliberal emphasis and energy that's going on in the world. I personally advocate independence for Puerto Rico, but we won't go there. Right. But I really think that Trump has so insulted the Puerto Ricans, has so disrespected the peoples of Puerto Rico that there's no way in the world they could do anything worse than independence. But anyway.
Where's the cultural center?
Cultural Center is on mission between 24th and 25th. Let me just ask two questions I'm very concerned about. One is Haiti, and the other one is Bolivia. And what I want to know is that in reference to Haiti, where are the people in reference to the governance, in reference to the power, in reference to the terror that is going on against the Haitian people, against la laws, against all the various productive areas in Haiti? What is the left doing? What can we do? What is the situation there? And lastly, in reference to Bolivia, I am so scared that this election is going to be crooked. I am so scared that MAS is not going to have an opportunity to really participate and exercise their franchise and elect a person representing the majority of the people. And I wish somebody would talk about that. Where does this go?
Should we answer?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll answer the question about Haiti and then pass it on to Bill for Bolivia. Yeah, stand up. Where the Haitian people stand, as Alicia said, or Alice said, there are probably a few who voted for Jovenel Moïse, but just a very few. The bulk of the Haitian people are very strongly behind the Lavalas movement. Their election, actually, after the runoff was stopped in 2016, they held another election that fall, and this time they didn't bother with trying to pretend they needed a runoff. The Electoral Council simply stated Moïse was the winner when that clearly was not the case. People are very much against it, they're resisting it, but it's difficult because they have so little means, you know, there's desperate poverty and people are being killed. So what can we do? Three things I'd say. Number one, be informed. Talk about it. Inform yourself. Tell your neighbors. Tell your coworkers. Tell your friends. A lot of people aren't aware of it. Talk to your elected representatives and your Congress people. They just sort of think, oh, in Haiti, it's not even on their radar. They need to know because it's the U.S. State Department that is really behind a lot of this terror that's going on there. And then, in terms of financial assistance, you know, the Haiti Emergency Relief Fund does get funds directly to these different groups. One of the efforts that we support, and the task force all supports it, is a media outlet called the Radio Timon, which is a grassroots radio that helps people stay informed throughout the country. We were recently able to get them a transmitter. So any donations you make to the Haiti Emergency Relief Fund will help, you know, give that kind of support to the movement, and see me afterwards. Actually, I'll give you the website, but see me if you have further questions. The website is www.haitiemergencyrelief.org. Thank you.
Well, that's a very good question about, you know, your concern about what's going to happen in these elections. On the surface, there's every reason to think it's not going to go up. Even though in all the polls, MAS is still tremendously popular and way ahead and everything. But they're trying to set up every single roadblock possible, including just this past week, USAID sent down a team to help set up the elections. And we know how reliable that is. I mean, that's how infiltrated the CIA is into what is going on down there. All the leadership of MAS, a lot of it had to go into hiding, had to go into exile. Some of them are in the Mexican embassy, and the Mexican embassy is being harassed. And then also the new government, that's so-called interim government, led by this woman Anais, who's a real right-wing fundamental. She's a Juan Guaido type that actually got in. She was a lower senator, and who knows how she actually got in there. But, you know, she issued a Supreme Court decree, got it passed, number 4078. 4078 says that the military can fire on any open protest with no incrimination. They can't be held accountable for it. So that's what's going on there. Now the positive thing, and this is part of what our whole panel has been about, is about the regionalism, and when we get some victory, even little victories, like what happened in Argentina and AMLO in Mexico, these are important. They're important from the point of view is that it's not an exaggeration that Evo Morales would probably be dead now if it wasn't for AMLO. because he got a plane down there, a military plane, and they were able to get on it and out of there just barely. Just barely, him and Linares, the vice president. And then now, under the new government in Argentina, they've been granted asylum, and not only were they granted asylum, but they also, MAS was able to have their convention, their election convention there. And so all the representatives ended up getting into Argentina to this conference. Evo was at it, he ran it, and they came up with a slate, a very democratic slate, where actually Evo was running for senator, and they figured out how to get him on the ballot. And it's interesting who they chose as the presidential choice. This guy named Luis Arce, and Arce was the economic architect of the success of what just happened. And people know Arce, and so they can look at him because the right wing really wanted an all-indigenous slate, because this is an all-indigenous slate. They can just like whip up the racism to any level that they want to. But this makes it so they can't. So they've got him, who's not indigenous, but the other guy is indigenous and very connected into the communities, in the indigenous communities. So that was the strategy they came up with, which makes a lot of sense. But I think this is what we put our hope on. Just like the way how Venezuela has been able to hold on, and I use the example of the military as being unwavering and staying with Maduro in the Bolivarian process. The other part of that is that in Venezuela, when Chavez comes in, 40% of the population, they weren't even listed in any registry and everything. And Chavez comes in and he says, who are the people of Venezuela? And so they started issuing national identity cards and stuff just to sort of take an inventory. And then he rose the level of education and the social indexes for all those people. People don't forget that. If they had nothing, if they had absolutely nothing except racism and poverty against them, and then suddenly, they've been lifted up, they're not going to go back. That's what we pin our hopes on. They're not going to stand for going back. Same thing in Bolivia, is that people had nothing. And in the last 15 years, it's been really a remarkable advancement. So let's put our hope in the people,
Can I say something? I just wanted to add what Bill said. And honestly, I understand, we have to rely on the struggles and the peoples. But honestly, I have no hope that Bolivia is going to be able to rise up and have elections, because they already told everybody, they already know what they want. And I think it would be really hard. This woman who was elected also president, she has no business in doing anything by, calling elections and monitoring the elections, and she's totally intervening now. I don't know how they're going to be able to go ahead with the elections. We know that the people, want what they want, but doesn't mean anything. We are in a different time, unfortunately, and I just don't really have a lot of hope that, in fact, I think it's going to be terrible what's going to happen in Bolivia, where it's going to be more people killed. We know that the military is not supportive of MAS. So what is going to happen? We don't know what is going to happen, and I hope I'm wrong. But, for what I heard from Latin America, everybody's very concerned. They keep pushing, Maybe something good will come out of it, but it's very difficult.
Oh, yeah. What was the situation with lithium? Oh, does this work?
Yeah, okay. What is the situation with lithium mining in Bolivia? Because that looked promising in terms of it was just going to be not foreign capital that would do it, and then it looked like a good thing under Morales. Now what's happening?
Yeah, 70% of all the lithium in the world is in Bolivia. And lithium goes into everything. It goes into TVs, it goes into all sorts of electronics, and even more important, from the point of view of the US, it goes into military equipment. So lithium is an important mineral. The value of it has raised, and just before, a month before the elections, the Morales government had made a deal with China. And the deal, I mean, see, this is the thing. Once again, you've got a socialist-leaning government, but a capitalist economic system. So they're having a deal in that world, even though it's not a neoliberal government. The game is neoliberal, is the capitalist market. So, what they said, they had cut out the U.S. because the U.S. wanted to control the plants. They wanted to control, in other words, basically they wanted to set them up as like their plantation. And the deal with the Chinese was much different. They were going to give them more money. The infrastructure would still be controlled by the Bolivians, and so they went that way. And for the U.S., that also had a trigger as far as the coup coming down, what it did.
It triggers like affected the coup.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, hey, we're not going to put up with this. I mean, that was the U.S.'s
So
position.
that was really,
Yeah, that was kind of the last straw.
last round.
Okay, can you pass it over?
Yeah, do you want us, this way?
No,
Okay,
no, not
down.
Richard, there's somebody behind you.
Oh.
Hi. Can people hear me? I want to thank the panel. This has sparked a lot of thinking for me and put together a lot of, I'm sure we all get overwhelmed at the state of the world today, so thank you very much. So I wanted to start there. I do have a question, it's a rhetorical question, but this panel helped me put it together, which is there's a broad distinction between popular governments, popular movements, and revolutionary. And I guess where my rhetorical question is there a worthwhile discussion about the particular intensity about the hostility to Cuba and Venezuela, okay? Which doesn't mean that there's broad hostility against any progressive democratic movement in Latin America. That goes back 200 years, tied to the Monroe Doctrine, all kinds of things like that. But I think the question of what is the particular hostility around Cuba and Venezuela, and what does it mean for progressives? So I think the rest of it is not a question, that's the rhetorical question. Here's my opinion about it. I was fortunate enough to go to spend a few weeks in Venezuela last year, and said I was going to go back every year, but of course that's a year and a half now. But what struck me is I got to spend a week on an official delegation, which was all the high-level party people, given a delegation to Americans explaining all the things that they want us to know. But the other fortunate thing is I got to spend the next 2 weeks just hanging out with two party militants who were not high-level. And I got to buy the lunch and pay for the taxis, and we spent 2 wonderful weeks just poking around Venezuela. And I saw something different. Not something contradictory, but something different, which is got to go into the homes of where the grassroots organizing, of how the Venezuelan people have been organized into people's committees, and went throughout the country just going right into people's homes. But here's what I got. I want to leave you an anecdote. So where the Guaido type people have power or support are the richest upper middle class suburbs of Caracas, okay, and hardly have very little influence in the more poor working class parts of the country. You have to go and see that from the ground. These party militants said to me, I said, so what's going to happen, because these communities in Venezuela are very educated, they're very articulate, they have a lot of foreign connections. And the response, which I thought was really incredible, said, well, they have pots and pans and we have guns. And that's really profound, because that is the upper middle class. They come out They have a lot of support, but they have basically pots and pans, and they're not prepared to go into the mountains to defend their thing. So here's the point I want to make. It's tied to Bolivia. So one is that I think that what links Cuba and Venezuela is the Revolutionary Party, the people, and the army. That's the link to Bolivia. So when you look at a lot of broad progressive movements, the question is there a revolutionary government that holds the army and has links to the people? And I think I would suggest that's why Venezuela is so urgent to me, because that's a different kind of setback. Anyway, I'll be done. Thank you.
Well, following up on that question, with regard to Bolivia, how come the MAS didn't take control of the army? What is anybody doing it? Is anybody doing it in Brazil? Lula didn't take control of the army. This guy in Fernandez in Argentina. Any thoughts on that? Why this is not happening?
I mean, I'll just say that is the question, and of course the Cuban army is 100% behind this government because it's part of the government, and it was a socialist. See, that's a big difference, right? Socialist revolution versus something that arrived the other ways. We're supportive of all that, but we'd rather have them all go the way of Cuba. That's the thing. We'd rather have that type of revolution because then you don't have that question. But Evo appointed this guy, Kalaman. Well, I don't know. And they were loyal to Washington, not to there. So maybe, I don't know. I don't want to speculate on Evo.
I'd like to address that. I really don't know about Bolivia, but I'm just going to make a speculation based on my experience. Someone in Haiti, but also in El Salvador. I was in El Salvador a couple times recently with Screen America's Watch delegations, and we met with army officials, in addition to all kinds of grassroots groups. They turned on the charm for us.
Yeah, right.
They had us, they served coffee, they chit-chatted, and one possibility is that when Evo was elected, U.S. was like, they didn't like this, but they figured, well, we got to bide our time, and so let's make sure, the army, gets along with him, and so that there's the appearance of working together and all of that. It's just a guess that something like that may have happened. A different example about the militaries comes with Haiti. When did the Haitian army get actually established? It was during the U.S. occupation of that country, 1915 to 1934. And they established the U.S. Army as a tool of repression of the people. And that was carried forward in the next few decades through the Duvaliers, so that when Aristide came to power, the people hated the army so much. They wanted no more army whatsoever, and it was abolished in 1995. And that remained. We see the kind of the outcome of that military occupation by the United Nations and after the coup of 2004, and the people really don't want to have an army. They're using the nonviolent methods of mass demonstrations, which is a huge challenge. But it's true that there is not a strong Haitian army, and that's the reason for it.
Hi. I actually wanted to make an announcement. First, I want to thank the panel, and I want to thank the group for putting on this great program. It's really tremendous, and it's such an important issue. I do want to say that I sort of think that we could talk ad nauseum about why this army didn't do that and why Evo didn't do that, but I think our task is really to make sure that they don't have to deal with that, because our task is to overthrow the war makers and the system in this country so that the rest of the world will be free. And I want to raise something in the way of making a quick announcement, that it is the question of Venezuela is still something that the left in this country is very confused about, as they are with Syria, as they are with many other issues. And there's a large part of the left that condemns, Maduro and condemns what's going on in other parts of the world, and doesn't understand the fact that we are in the United States and we have to oppose U.S. imperialism and demand that the U.S. get out and believe that the people of the world will make their own decisions without the U.S. deciding it, even the U.S. left deciding it, which it likes to do. And so it has always been a big question in the anti-war movement. Some part of the anti-war movement at different times says, oh, sanctions are okay, but not war. And I just want to say that right, sanctions are war. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I just want to let you know about an international campaign that has been started. There's a very large coalition. It's called Sanctions Kill, and it will be. It's probably gotten a bigger start on the East Coast, unfortunately, than on the West Coast. But the days of March 13th through 15th are going to be days against all of the sanctions, U.S. imposed sanctions. We're not talking about other sanctions. We're certainly not talking about the Palestinian struggle and BDS, and we're not talking about any sanctions against Israel and Zionism. But we're talking about sanctions imposed by U.S. imperialism and European powers against people in the world who are struggling to be free. So I have a flyer, I'm going to pass it around, and we're going to try to do an event here, and I just wanted to alert you to it. And yeah, thank you very much.
Pass it over on that.
Yeah.
It's not much of a question. I'd just like to know if any of the panel would be able to amplify a little bit on the power of the evangelicals and the way the Catholic Church approaches the rise of the evangelical perspective in their areas.
Can we go on to the next, or do
There's a question, yeah.
I know.
Turn it on.
I think we're gonna. I think we all agree about the rise of evangelicals, but I don't think there's any more light that's going to be shed here.
One of the things that evangelicals have done throughout Latin America is they've been very much a friend of the right wing. They never talk about human rights. I know in Colombia there are evangelicals. You can go into a community of peasants where there are 50 houses of relocated peasants who've come from because of the violence, come from other areas. And there are 3 evangelical churches in that community. Those evangelical churches support the police, they support the repression, and they never, ever, ever, ever participate in denouncing the human rights and the assassinations that the government and the paramilitaries do on the peasant communities. They've also worked their way very much into the middle classes with the crisis of the Catholic Church throughout Latin America. They've worked themselves into the middle classes, into the cities, and they support the government. They sometimes they talk about progressive points, but in the long run, they're always there supporting the government, supporting the repression, and supporting the U.S. And so they're a very important ideological form of neoliberalism in Latin America.
I just have a quick question, which reflects this the statement just previous about the left opposing Maduro. I'm just wondering if there is, what does the panel think is the hope for Venezuela to overcome the American pressure, and what effect does Maduro have on that, whatever amount of hopefulness there is?
Well, I think that
It's on. It is on.
It is on.
Okay. Sorry.
It's low.
I think Venezuela has tried really hard, and what so far hasn't worked is that the military is still with Maduro. And as far as the military stay with Maduro, they will be okay. because the U.S. cannot afford, so they're trying to divide them. They constantly threw things to some of them, but so far, didn't happen. So I think that our hope is that Venezuela continue to resist, and if you look at they have done a lot of conferences internationally, in Venezuela and in Cuba, just to bring them as an example, And we were there when Maduro came to Cuba and spoke to the people. I know most people cannot travel all the time, but it was very inspiring to see that Maduro was there because he's like a symbol of resistance.
Right.
Cuba has been a symbol of resistance for 60 years, but Venezuela is a new, front of resistance. So I think that as far as they keep doing what they're doing, they're okay. There's a lot of problems inside the country, no question about it, and I'm not Venezuelan and I don't live there, and I know everyday life is hard. But, internationally and for us in the US, we can see that, we have to support our resistance. Because it's the only way for us in the U.S. to support the resistance of the Venezuelans, the resistance of the Bolivians, the resistance of all the Latin American countries that are dealing with U.S. is try to crush them.
Right.
You need a new government in the U.S.
Yes.
Definitely.
Anybody want this?
They down here want it?
What about over here just before?
But you could go first.
No, you go ahead, because I want to keep it in order.
Hi, I'm Maddie. I'm with Dispossessed, the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. And I just wanted to share just a little piece of news from El Salvador that we're going to have an article come out about that Teresa can send out. So right now in El Salvador, there's a fight going on to stop the privatization of water. And I just want to talk about it for just a second because I think that it's important also to talk about sites of, as we're doing with Cuba and Venezuela, sites of power and hope. Because right now in El Salvador, the Legislative Assembly, the presidency, the Attorney General, the courts are all controlled by the right wing. And so within the government, they have all of the power they need to privatize water, but they have not been able to do it because of the power of the people and the power of the social movement, which like the feminist movement, the student movement, the labor movement, all of the different social movements are all united behind this effort to stop the privatization of water. And so it's really, really impressive that this united social movement has been able to stop, to be able to stop something when they have absolutely no power within the structure of the government. And so we're gonna have an article come out about it soon, but they also need like international solidarity and support to be able to continue this fight. So we've been doing things like circulating petitions. We just got 1,000 signatures on one of them and presenting them before the Legislative Assembly in El Salvador to show that there's international support for this movement. So we'll be continuing to send out those things, and Teresa can share that information with you all. But I just wanted to like highlight this site of really successful resistance to a completely right-wing government. So that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the issue of military, and repeatedly it is shown that the United States can use the military officers to undermine any gains people have made where the revolution has grassroots and democratic and all that, but it can undermine it. It happened to Allende, and it looks like a repeat in Bolivia. So my question is there a kind of idealism in mass about which has fed into this belief that you don't need a hard force, and the hard force will only come, as you already mentioned, because it is shown in Venezuela, because Chavez changed the army and brought people from the bottom up. And actually that is the second time, that as far as I remember, or maybe third time, this happened in Soviet Union. That's what Stalin did to the army, because there was some officers were plotting an overthrow, and then he got rid of those officers and then brought in soldiers, promoted them, and that's why they fought so hard against the Germans. And so this issue of there's certain amount of idealism, it seems like creeps into the left movement and MES. Would you comment on that, or am I barking up the wrong tree?
Yeah, thanks for that. Comment I have is, all of this happens in a certain context. So, again, when I was last in El Salvador, we met, the president at the time was Salvador Sanchez, who was part of the leftist FMLN party. And we met with him, and we knew that El Salvador still had some people, some police people, trainers at the SOA. Now it's called something else, but it's School of the Americas in Georgia. And he didn't like that. You know, he's pretty much on our side. But he just made a cryptic comment. He said that, you know, we asked him if he could remove those people from the SOA. He said, the pressure from the United States is very intense. So there's, you know, I don't know any specifics, but there are pressures put on some of these leaders who may want to do some of the things you talked about. And they have to weigh the consequences, you know. I don't know. If Evo had tried to do that sooner, maybe the coup would have happened sooner. Who knows? But it's just, I don't want to put myself into their shoes because I know they're facing really, really tough situations and decisions. That's my only comment.
Agree to that, and also every single country is of different circumstances, you know, and so we don't know. And as far as Bolivia goes, that's what we're all scratching our head about, you know, because it's sort of so obvious that they were so tied. But when he came into power, those relationships were already developed, so he didn't have control over that.
Over many years.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that like none of this stuff is, you know, unless it's a real revolution, you know, it comes with sort of like the good points and the bad points.
You know, I wanted to also bring, you know, I know you know this, but the U.S. is not coming from a position of they are stronger. In fact, you know, the U.S. is weak, and I think it makes it more dangerous because they're so desperate to get it the way that they want it. And I say this because I think that it's true that a lot of countries are you know, a lot of countries in Latin America, they have to take a position, and there's an issue of the military, you know, who has the military behind. But I still think that we don't have to see the U.S. as, you know, we see that they're getting away with a lot of stuff. We see that they you know, they do what you know, they want, but at the same time, I think that the U.S. is losing in the war. I really do. I think that they are, you know, morally bankrupt. And honestly, you know, we need to focus in the U.S. where, you know, every single thing that you look at it's going down the hill. The housing situation, you know, the homelessness, you know, the healthcare, everything, you know, it's going down the hill. What authority has the U.S. to tell other countries in the hemisphere how do they have to run their business when the U.S. is not doing that? The majority of people in the U.S. are suffering right now because of the Trump and the rich people in this country. So I just wanted to say that because...
Ambrose asked me to move it on.
Okay, I'll pass it.
Yes, we have to get out of here by 12:30.
Yeah. So I wanted to address this whole issue of such a large part of the left in the U.S. Not understanding the situation in Venezuela and actually some of them actually supporting Juan Guaido. And I think that it's important for us to try to understand what's happening here because it affects how we act here in the belly of the beast, related to the whole idealism issue and all that. I think that there's still, among some of the left in the US, a blind faith in bourgeois democracy. And it's this blind faith in bourgeois democracy that took people by surprise. For example, what happened in Iowa, where the Democratic Party will do nothing to stop, there will be nothing to stop the Democratic Party from trying to stop Bernie Sanders, for example. And their teeth came out of the Democratic Party as this fiasco happened in Iowa. But this relates to the some of the less view of Venezuela and Cuba even, and their lack of understanding of sanctions killed, for example, even in Iran. And so I think we have to look at, people have a blind faith right now in the upcoming elections that if people come out to vote, that the election won't be stolen, for example. And there's so many moves to stop democratic participation in the elections in this country, and people aren't seeing that Trump's going to steal the election no matter what the popular vote is. So I bring this back to the importance of understanding Venezuela in that light.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks a lot again. I have an announcement. Last night I went to a presentation about 700, 800 people attended at the South Berkeley Senior Center on migrants. And what they're doing is organizing how to be active about it. The only thing that I could figure out for myself is that I contact a lot of lists and I would put up notes asking people if they could shelter a migrant, if they could offer some sanctuary individually for a migrant. And if you want to find out more about it, you could contact me, but I'm not directly connected. Surge, Showing Up for Racial Justice, of course, is a local organization, and there are a lot of interfaith organizations. I don't support interfaith because it all steals everything away from us. The other thing I wanted to ask is whether, I just want to encourage you to ask, does anybody have space to shelter a migrant so that they can get out of the jailed situation at the border and have sanctuary and proceed with their processes? The UN sends out a message saying, UNHCR, please contribute. People have been starving in Colombia, people from Venezuela. And I wrote them a note and I said, give the money to Venezuela, let the help there. And I wonder if I'm right.
What I'm going to do is I'd like to give people who haven't had a chance to talk, raise your
Did you have a
hand.
question?
The people who
Marilyn,
haven't
did you
spoken.
have one?
Right behind you.
Sorry.
Jessica. Oh, wait.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about the sanctions. I think this is a very important factor in all of these situations. Right now, apparently, if the information is correct, 39 countries with 1/3 of the world's population are suffering from U.S. imposed sanctions. And that's a lot of people in the world that are suffering from U.S. imposed sanctions. And it seems to me that there are going to be these demonstrations happening that are apparently broadly supported by many different parts of the movement in March 13th to 15th, the International Days against U.S. imposed sanctions. And I think this is an important thing that people can get behind and should get behind to try to weigh in against the power of the United States government to mess with people's lives in the rest of the world. Thank you.
We're passing over. We only have a couple more minutes, so I appreciate for people who haven't already spoken. So.
Oh, this person hasn't spoken.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not gonna walk up to the microphone.
Go on.
I just wanted to, I was at that same meeting, and I wanted to add a coda to what our compañera he was saying about bailing, or about people getting out of the immigration detention centers and the need for that. And in addition to housing people, if that might not be within people's realms, but they need to be bailed out of detention center also. And so if people would like to know how to get money to a bail fund, you can speak to us also. Thank you. That's it.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Someone over here?
I've just been following the media, and regarding Godot, everybody was sort of taken by the image of Godot trying to get over a fence by PBS. It's our public broadcasting system, and he was locked out of the National Assembly, which I guess is the Congress for Venezuela. Yes, everyone thought so. So that was absolute proof. And so could you speak to that just very quickly? Thank you very much.
Yeah, Juan Guaido had a photo op where he jumped the fence in the National Assembly. That was after he decided not to walk in the front door. It was a complete setup that the corporate press put in. The fact of the matter is that he didn't have any support. After that, though, to see that it was all set up, is that immediately afterward he went to one of the right-wing newspapers, which if you read the U.S. press, you would think that there's no press freedom. They had a meeting there with 100, not delegates from the National Assembly, but alternative delegates. And 100% of those people re-voted him as president. So the fake president had a fake National Assembly, 100% re-voted him into the presidency.
I think it's 12:30.
And I think we're out of time right now. And thank you for being in solidarity with us and with the embassy protectors. Thank you very much for coming.
Bravo, everybody.